the small white pills scattered across the marble bathroom counter like fallen snow, each one a betrayal that Alina Martinez couldn't yet comprehend. Her hands trembled as she held the pharmacy bottle, her name printed clearly on the label, her prescription number matching the receipt in her purse, but the contents, wrong. Completely, devastatingly wrong. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The morning light streaming through the frosted window cast long shadows across the pills, and Alina found herself counting them obsessively. 28 pills. The right number, the right bottle, the right pharmacy. But these weren't her birth control pills. These were prenatal vitamins, disguised with surgical precision to match the size and color of her usual medication. "Alina, sweetheart. Breakfast is ready." Margaret's voice drifted up from the kitchen below, saccharine sweet as always, carrying that particular tone she used when she wanted something. Alina's mother-in-law had been staying with them for 3 weeks now, ostensibly to help after Alina's minor surgery, but the woman's presence had felt more like an invasion than assistance. The realization hit like ice water in her veins. Margaret. Margaret had access to everything: the house, the kitchen, Alina's bathroom, her medications. Margaret, who had been increasingly vocal about her desire for grandchildren. Margaret, who had made pointed comments about biological clocks and family legacies during every dinner conversation. Alina's reflection stared back at her from the bathroom mirror, 28 years old, dark hair falling in waves past her shoulders, brown eyes now wide with a mixture of shock and growing rage. She had always prided herself on being observant, detail-oriented. How had she missed this? How long had this been going on? Her phone buzzed against the marble counter. A text from her husband, David. "Running late at the office again. Don't wait. Up. Love you." The same message he'd been sending for weeks, his absence making space for his mother's increasingly intrusive presence. The bottle in her hand felt heavier than it should, weighted with implications she was only beginning to understand. Alina thought back to the past 3 weeks. Had she felt different? Had there been signs? The slight nausea she'd attributed to stress, the unusual fatigue, the way certain smells had become almost overwhelming. She'd dismissed it all as side effects from her surgery recovery. "Alina, your eggs are getting cold, dear." Margaret's voice carried that edge it got when she wasn't immediately obeyed, the same tone Alina had heard her use with David throughout their 5-year marriage. The bathroom suddenly felt suffocating. Alina grabbed her phone and typed quickly, "Emily, can you call me? Emergency." She sent the message to her best friend, the one person she knew would understand the gravity of what she'd discovered. As she waited for Emily's response, Alina's mind raced backward through the weeks. Margaret arriving with her 2 large suitcases, and that tight smile she wore when she was planning something. The way she'd insisted on organizing Alina's medications while she recovered. "Just trying to help, dear. You know how scattered you get when you're not feeling well." The bathroom door creaked, and Alina quickly swept the pills back into the bottle, her heart hammering as she heard footsteps in the hallway. "Alina? I thought I heard you up here. Is everything all right?" Margaret's voice was closer now, just outside the bathroom door. "Fine," Alina managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Just getting ready for the day." "Well, hurry down. I've made your favorite, blueberry pancakes, and I picked up some of that herbal tea you like, the one that's supposed to be good for women's health." There was something in Margaret's tone, a satisfaction that made Alina's stomach turn. Through the frosted window, Alina could see their neighbor, Mrs. Chen, tending to her garden, the same routine she'd maintained for the 15 years Alina and David had lived in this house. Everything outside appeared normal, peaceful, but inside these walls, something fundamental had shifted. Her phone buzzed. "Emily. Calling you in 2 minutes. What's wrong?" Alina clutched the bottle tighter. She needed proof. She needed to understand exactly what had been done to her and for how long. But first, she needed to get through breakfast with Margaret without revealing what she knew. The floorboards creaked as Margaret's footsteps retreated down the hallway. Alina waited, counting heartbeats, then carefully opened the bottle again. She selected 3 pills and wrapped them in tissue paper, sliding them into her jewelry box behind her grandmother's pearl earrings. Evidence. She would need evidence. The kitchen smelled of butter and vanilla when she finally descended the stairs, Margaret bustling around with theatrical domesticity. The older woman had always been beautiful in a sharp, calculated way. Blonde hair perfectly styled even first thing in the morning, makeup applied with precision, clothes that spoke of money and careful attention to appearance. But today, watching, her move around the kitchen that belonged to Alina and David, she looked different. Predatory. "There you are, sweetheart." I was starting to worry. Margaret's smile was warm, practiced. The same smile she'd worn at Alina and David's wedding when she'd whispered to her friends about how she hoped they wouldn't wait too long to start a family. The pancakes were perfect, golden and fluffy, arranged artfully on the blue ceramic plates that had been a wedding gift from Alina's grandmother. Margaret had even found the good maple syrup, the kind they saved for special occasions. It felt like a celebration, and that realization made Alina's throat close with fury. "You're so thoughtful," Alina said carefully, settling into her chair. "I don't know what I would have done without you these past few weeks." Margaret beamed, pouring fresh coffee from the French press. "Family takes care of family, dear. That's what we do." She paused, her hand resting on Alina's shoulder. "I just want to see you and David happy. Settled. Complete." The word hung in the air between them. Complete. As if Alina and David's 5-year marriage, their carefully planned life together, their shared dreams and daily intimacies were somehow incomplete without Margaret's desired addition. "We are happy," Alina said softly, cutting into her pancakes. They tasted like ash in her mouth. "Of course you are, sweetheart. But there's a different kind of happiness that comes with children. A deeper purpose." Margaret settled into her own chair, her movements precise and graceful. "I was just your age when I had David. 28. The perfect age, really. Young enough to have energy, old enough to have wisdom." Alina's phone rang, Emily's contact photo filling the screen. "I should take this," she said, standing quickly. "Can't it wait? Your breakfast—" "It's work," Alina lied smoothly, already moving toward the living room. "You know how it is," she answered on the 4th ring, stepping out onto the front porch, where Margaret couldn't overhear. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of Mrs. Chen's jasmine and the distant sound of children playing in the park 3 blocks away. I need you to listen carefully," Alina said without preamble. "I think my mother-in-law has been tampering with my birth control." The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Alina wondered if the call had dropped. "Are you sure?" Emily's voice was tight, professional. As a nurse practitioner, she'd heard her share of medical horror stories, but this was personal. "I'm holding a bottle of prenatal vitamins that are supposed to be my birth control pills. They're the exact same size and color, Emily. This wasn't an accident." "Jesus Christ, Alina. How long do you think this has been going on?" "I don't know. 3 weeks? Maybe longer?" Alina's voice cracked. "I've been feeling weird lately, but I thought it was just recovery from my surgery. What if— What if I'm pregnant?" "Okay, breathe. First thing, you need to get a pregnancy test. Second thing, you need to document everything. Take pictures of those pills. Save the bottle. Write down everything you remember about how you've been feeling and when it started." Through the front window, Alina could see Margaret clearing the breakfast dishes, humming softly to herself. The domesticity of the scene felt surreal, sinister. "There's more," Alina said quietly. She's been making comments for weeks about grandchildren, about how David needs to carry on the family name, and David's been working late constantly, leaving me alone with her. Alina, listen to me. This isn't just about switching pills. This is reproductive coercion. This is a crime. The words hit like a physical blow. Crime. The idea that what Margaret had done might be illegal hadn't fully formed in Alina's mind, but hearing Emily say it made everything crystallize into sharp, terrifying focus. "I need to figure out what to do," Alina whispered. "You need to talk to David first. Tonight. Don't wait. And Alina, take a pregnancy test today. You need to know what you're dealing with." The front door opened, and Margaret appeared, her smile bright and concerned. "Alina, is everything all right, dear? You've been out here for quite a while." "Work emergency," Alina said, ending the call. "You know how it is." "Of course, sweetheart. I saved your pancakes in the oven. They'll still be warm." As they walked back into the house together, Alina felt as though she was seeing everything with new eyes. The family photos on the mantel that included Margaret's opinions on their composition, the kitchen organization that reflected Margaret's preferences rather than Alina's, the subtle ways the older woman had been reshaping their home to suit her vision of what their life should look like. "I need to run to the pharmacy," Alina said suddenly. "I'm almost out of vitamins." Margaret's smile never wavered, but something flickered in her eyes. "I could go for you, dear. Save you the trip." "That's sweet, but I need to get out of the house for a bit. Fresh air, you know?" "Of course, though perhaps you should take it easy. You've been looking a bit peaked lately." The comment felt loaded. Significant. Alina forced herself to smile. "Just tired, I think. The surgery recovery has been harder than expected." 20 minutes later, Alina sat in her car in the CVS parking lot, 3 different pregnancy tests on the passenger seat. Her hands were shaking again, and she realized she'd been holding her breath. The autumn afternoon was warm. The sky, a perfect blue that seemed to mock the chaos spinning through her mind. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "Mom mentioned you seemed upset this morning. Everything okay?" Even from his office across town, Margaret's influence reached. Alina stared at the message, wondering how much her husband knew, how complicit he might be in his mother's scheme. The David she'd married wouldn't be part of something like this. But the David who'd been distant and absent for weeks, leaving her alone with his increasingly intrusive mother. She wasn't sure about him anymore. She typed back, "We need to talk tonight. It's important." The response came quickly. "Can it wait? Big presentation tomorrow." "No, David. It can't wait." The 3 pregnancy tests felt heavier than they should as Alina walked back into the house. Margaret was in the living room now, organizing photo albums with the same meticulous attention she'd given to Alina's medications. "I found some lovely pictures from David's childhood," Margaret said without looking up. "I thought we might put together a proper family album, something to pass down to the next generation." The casual certainty in her voice, the assumption that there would be a next generation soon, made Alina's jaw clench, but she managed to keep her voice level. "That sounds nice. I've always believed that a home isn't truly complete without..." Children's laughter filling the rooms, Margaret continued, her fingers trailing over a photo of David at age 5. "This house has such good bones for a family. All these bedrooms going to waste. The spare room upstairs." Alina suddenly remembered how Margaret had spent an afternoon last week organizing that space, claiming she wanted to make it more useful. Had she been planning a nursery? "I'll be upstairs for a while," Alina said carefully. "I have some work to catch up on." In the privacy of her bedroom, Alina locked the door and spread the pregnancy tests across her dresser. The instructions, blurred as her eyes filled with tears. Not from sadness, but from a rage so pure and clean it surprised her with its intensity. Margaret had violated her in the most intimate way possible. Had made decisions about Alina's body, her future, her family without consent, had potentially altered the entire course of her life with surgical precision and grandmotherly smiles. The first test showed 2 pink lines within 30 seconds. The second test, positive. The third, positive. Alina sank onto the edge of her bed, the tests scattered before her like evidence in a trial that hadn't yet begun. 6 weeks pregnant, if the timing lined up with her suspicions about when Margaret had started switching the pills. Her phone buzzed. A text from Margaret downstairs. "I'm making your favorite dinner tonight. David's favorite, too. I thought we could have a nice family meal together." Family meal. As if they were already the family Margaret envisioned. As if Alina's choices and David's promises and their careful planning meant nothing compared to an older woman's determination to see her genetic legacy continued. Outside her bedroom window, the afternoon shadows were lengthening, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear children playing. The sound that used to bring her joy, the anticipation of someday choosing to bring children into the world with David, now felt tainted by the circumstances of how that choice had been stolen from her. Alina gathered the pregnancy tests and hid them in the same jewelry box where she'd placed the pill samples. Evidence. She would need all the evidence she could gather. But first, she needed to decide who she could trust. David, whose mother had raised him, shaped him, might still be operating under her influence. Emily, who understood the medical implications but wasn't family. The police, who might not understand the subtlety of what had been done. And Margaret, downstairs humming as she prepared what she clearly expected to be a celebration dinner, still had no idea that Alina knew. The house felt different now, charged with secrets and lies and the kind of betrayal that changes everything forever. Through the floorboards, Alina could hear Margaret moving around the kitchen, preparing what she undoubtedly believed would be the beginning of a new chapter. But she had no idea that Alina was writing a different story entirely. The dinner table had never felt like a battlefield before. But as Alina sat across from Margaret that evening, every clink of silverware against china sounded like weapons being drawn. The pot roast was perfect, of course. Margaret's cooking always was. But each bite felt like swallowing stones. David had called at 6 to say he'd be another hour late, leaving the 2 women alone with their simmering tension and the weight of unspoken truths. Margaret had set 3 places anyway, the third setting standing empty like an accusation. "You've barely touched your food, dear," Margaret observed, cutting her meat with surgical precision. "I made sure to include plenty of iron-rich vegetables. So important for women our age." Our age. Margaret was 54, had been married at 22, pregnant by 23. She spoke as though she and Alina were contemporaries, as though the 26 years between them were merely a suggestion rather than an entire generation of different expectations, different freedoms. "I'm just not very hungry tonight," Alina said, pushing carrots around her plate. The smell of the gravy was making her stomach turn, another symptom she now understood in its proper context. Margaret's pale blue eyes studied Alina with the intensity of a scientist examining a specimen. "You know, I was the same way during my first trimester with David. Couldn't keep much down for weeks. Lost 8 pounds before I finally started to feel better." The words hit like ice water. First trimester, Margaret knew. Had known all along. Alina's hand tightened around her fork. That must have been difficult. Oh, it was. But so worth it in the end. Margaret's smile was serene, satisfied. There's nothing quite like holding your firstborn for the first time. David was such a perfect baby. 8 pounds, 3 ounces, strong lungs, good color. The nurses all commented on what a healthy baby he was. The front door opened, saving Alina from having to respond. David's voice echoed through the hallway. "Sorry I'm so late. Traffic was murder on the..." He stopped in the doorway to the dining room, taking in the scene. His mother, perfectly composed. His wife, rigid with barely controlled emotion. "What did I miss?" he asked, but his tone suggested he wasn't sure he wanted to know. David Martinez had always been handsome in an understated way, tall and lean, with dark hair that never quite stayed in place and brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled. But lately, those smiles had been rare, and tonight he looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than long work hours. "Just catching up, son," Margaret said smoothly. "Alina and I were discussing family planning." The lie was so casual, so expertly delivered, that for a moment Alina wondered if she'd imagined the entire conversation. But the satisfied gleam in Margaret's eyes confirmed everything. "Mom," David said with a sigh, settling into his chair, "we've talked about this. Alina and I will decide when we're ready for kids." "Of course, sweetheart. I just think it's important to be prepared. Life has a way of surprising us, you know." David reached for the wine bottle, then paused, glancing at Alina. "You're not having any?" The question was innocent, but loaded with implications. Alina rarely refused wine with dinner, especially after a stressful day. Margaret watched the exchange with barely concealed interest. "I have a headache," Alina said. "Probably shouldn't mix alcohol with the ibuprofen I took earlier." It wasn't entirely a lie, but it felt like one. Everything felt tainted now, every interaction filtered through the lens of Margaret's deception. David poured himself a generous glass and took a long sip. "This presentation tomorrow is going to be the death of me. Henderson's been breathing down my neck all week." "You work too hard, son," Margaret said, but her attention remained fixed on Alina. "A man needs balance in his life. Work, family, future generations, purpose." "Mom," David warned, but without real heat. He'd been having this conversation with his mother for years, and the fight had gone out of him. Alina stood abruptly. "I need some air." She was on the back porch before either of them could protest, the cool evening air filling her lungs like medicine. Their backyard was David's pride. Carefully maintained flower beds, a vegetable garden that produced more tomatoes than they could eat, a small patio where they'd hosted countless barbecues with friends who had gradually stopped coming around, as Margaret's visits became more frequent. Through the kitchen window, she could see David and Margaret in conversation, their voices too low to hear, but their body language telling the story. Margaret, leaning forward intently. David running his hands through his hair in the gesture that meant he was stressed and trying to avoid conflict. Alina's phone buzzed. "Emily. How are you holding up?" She typed back. "Confirmed pregnant. Haven't told David yet. His mother is making comments that suggest she knows. Holy shit. Are you safe?" The question stopped Alina short. Safe? Was she safe in her own home with her husband and his mother? A week ago, she would have laughed at the question. Tonight, she wasn't sure. Physically, yes. Emotionally, that's more complicated. "Do you want me to come over?" Alina considered it, but Margaret would ask questions about Emily's unexpected visit, would insert herself into the conversation, would find a way to turn even that support system to her advantage. "Not yet, but stay close to your phone." "Always." "And Alina, document everything. Everything she says, everything she does. If this goes where I think it might, you'll need records." The back door opened and David appeared, wine glass in hand. "Hey, you okay?" "Just needed some air." Alina slipped her phone into her pocket. "Your mother's a lot to handle sometimes." "I know." He settled beside her on the porch swing they'd installed 3 summers ago. "She means well, but she can be intense about the grandchildren thing." "David." Alina turned to face him fully. "We need to talk. Really talk. Can it wait? Until tomorrow? I'm barely keeping my eyes open, and this presentation, no, it can't wait." The sharpness in her voice made him look at her properly for the first time in weeks. Something's happened. Something serious. Through the window, they could see Margaret clearing the dinner dishes with mechanical efficiency. Every few seconds, her gaze flicked toward the porch, monitoring their conversation. What kind of something? David's voice was carefully neutral, the tone he used when he sensed conflict approaching. Alina had rehearsed this conversation in her head a dozen times, but now that the moment had arrived, the words felt impossible. How do you tell your husband that his mother has violated your bodily autonomy? How do you explain that the woman who raised him has committed what might be a crime? Your mother has been interfering with my medications. David was quiet for a long moment, his wine glass suspended halfway to his lips. What do you mean, interfering? I mean she's been switching out my birth control pills with prenatal vitamins. The glass slipped from David's fingers, shattering against the porch floor. The sound brought Margaret to the window immediately, her face appearing behind the glass like a concerned ghost. That's... David stared at the broken glass. That's not possible. Mom wouldn't... She wouldn't do something like that. But even as he said it, Alina could see the doubt creeping into his expression, the pieces clicking together, his mother's increasing pushiness about grandchildren, her convenient presence during Alina's recovery when she had access to everything, the subtle comments about biological clocks and family legacies. I have proof, Alina said quietly. What kind of proof? Before she could answer, the back door opened and Margaret appeared, dish rag in hand. Is everything all right? I heard glass breaking. Just clumsy, David said automatically, but his voice sounded hollow. I'll get a broom, Margaret said, but her eyes were fixed on Alina's face, reading the tension there with uncomfortable accuracy. No need, Alina said, standing. I'll clean it up. Nonsense, dear. You should be resting. You've seemed so tired lately. The concern in her voice would have sounded genuine to anyone who didn't know what Alina now knew. But there was something else there, a probing quality, as if Margaret was testing to see how much Alina had figured out. I'm fine, Alina said firmly. David, can we continue our conversation inside? Margaret stepped aside to let them pass, but Alina felt the woman's eyes on her back like a physical weight. In the living room, David slumped into his favorite chair, suddenly looking older than his 31 years. Show me, he said quietly. Show me the proof. Alina retrieved the jewelry box from upstairs, her heart pounding as she climbed the stairs past Margaret, who was now busying herself in the kitchen. With elaborate normalcy, the older woman was humming again, the same tune she'd been humming all week. A lullaby, Alina realized now. Back in the living room, she opened the box and showed David the tissue-wrapped pills, then produced her phone to display the photos. She'd taken of the vitamin bottle with her prescription label. David studied the evidence with the methodical attention he brought to his work as an engineer. His face cycled through disbelief, confusion, and finally a growing anger that Alina had never seen directed at his mother before. Jesus Christ, he whispered. How long do you think this has been going on? At least 3 weeks. Maybe longer. Alina sat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. David, I took a pregnancy test today. 3 of them, actually. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. From the kitchen came the sounds of Margaret finishing the dishes, still humming that lullaby. And? David's voice was barely audible. I'm pregnant. He closed his eyes, his hands covering his face. When he spoke, his voice was muffled. Are you sure? 6 weeks from what I can calculate. 6 weeks. He looked up, and Alina saw her own sense of violation reflected in his eyes. That means she started switching them almost as soon as she got here. Yes, this is... He stood up, began pacing. This is insane. She's my mother. She's not capable of... David. Alina's voice cut through his denial. You know her better than anyone. Is she capable of this? He stopped pacing, his back to her. Through the archway, they could see Margaret moving through the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already spotless. "She's always been controlling," he admitted finally. "About my career, my friends. Even about you sometimes. But this crosses every line. What do we do?" Before David could answer, Margaret appeared in the doorway, drying her hands on a kitchen towel. Her smile was bright, but there was something predatory in her eyes. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "I just wanted to let you know that I've prepared the guest room for another few weeks. I know Alina's recovery has been challenging, and I want to make sure she has all the support she needs." The casualness of the announcement, the assumption that her extended stay was welcome, felt like another violation. Alina watched David's face, waiting to see how he would respond. "Actually, Mom," David said slowly, "I think we need some space. Time to adjust to recent developments." Margaret's smile never wavered, but something shifted behind her eyes. "Recent developments?" "We know," Alina said simply. The three words hung in the air like an accusation. Margaret's towel stilled in her hands, and for a moment, the mask of concerned mother-in-law slipped entirely. "Know what, dear? About the pills. About what you did?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving between David and Alina with calculation. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, reasonable. "I think there might be some confusion here. I was only trying to help organize Alina's medications while she recovered. Perhaps there was some mix-up at the pharmacy." "Mom," David's voice carried a warning. Don't what, sweetheart? I'm simply suggesting that perhaps we're jumping to conclusions. Pharmacy errors happen all the time." The gaslighting was expert, delivered with such conviction that for a moment, Alina almost doubted her own evidence. But then she remembered the 3 positive pregnancy tests upstairs, the prenatal vitamins in her jewelry box, the weeks of subtle comments about grandchildren. "There was no mix-up," Alina said firmly. "You switched my pills deliberately." Margaret's laugh was light, dismissive. "Oh, honey, that's quite an accusation. Why would I do such a thing?" "Because you want grandchildren," David said, his voice growing stronger. "Because you've been pushing us about starting a family for years." "Wanting grandchildren is hardly a crime, David. Most mothers look forward to that stage of life." "Tampering with someone's medication is a crime," Alina said. The word hung between them like a blade. Margaret's composure finally cracked, just slightly. "Crime?" She laughed again, but it sounded forced. "Really, Alina, you're being quite dramatic. I'm family. Family looks out for each other, makes sure the right decisions get made." "The right decisions?" David stepped forward. "Who are you to decide what's right for my wife? For our marriage?" "I'm your mother," Margaret said simply, as if that explained everything. "I raised you, shaped you, sacrificed everything for you. The least you can do is carry on the family line." The entitlement in her voice was breathtaking. She genuinely believed that her role as David's mother gave her the right to make decisions about Alina's body, their marriage, their future. "You need to leave," Alina said. Margaret's eyes snapped to her. "Excuse me? You need to pack your things and leave our house. Tonight." "Now, let's not be hasty," Margaret said, but her voice had lost its warmth. "Emotions are running high. Perhaps we should all sleep on this and discuss it rationally in the morning." "There's nothing to discuss," David said. "What you did?" "Mom, what you did is unforgivable." For the first time since Alina had known her, Margaret looked genuinely shaken. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling, revealing something desperate and ugly underneath. "You can't mean that," she whispered. "David, I'm your mother. Everything I've ever done has been for you, for your future." "Not this," David said firmly. "This wasn't for me. This was for you." Margaret's gaze shifted, between them calculating, searching for weakness. When she found none, her expression hardened. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. "Both of you. You're making a mistake that will affect the rest of your lives." "The only mistake was trusting you," Alina replied. Margaret looked at her for a long moment, and Alina saw something like hatred flicker across her features before the mask slipped back into place. "I'll pack my things," Margaret said with icy dignity. "But mark my words, this family needs me more than you know. You'll realize that soon enough." As she swept from the room, Alina felt David's hand find hers. His palm was damp with sweat, but his grip was steady. "Are we doing the right thing?" he asked quietly. Alina thought about the pregnancy tests upstairs, about the choice that had been stolen from her, about the months of careful family planning that had been subverted by one woman's determination to control their lives. "Yes," she said, "we're doing the only thing we can do." But as they listened to Margaret moving around upstairs, packing her things with aggressive efficiency, Alina couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Margaret wasn't the type of woman to accept defeat gracefully, and her parting words had sounded less like hurt feelings and more like a threat. Through the living room window, the night pressed dark against the glass, and somewhere in that darkness, Alina sensed their quiet life was about to become something much more complicated. Margaret left that night with the theatrical dignity of a queen in exile, her suitcases packed with military precision, and her parting words still echoing through the house like a curse. "You'll regret this, both of you." She'd stood in the doorway, framed by the porch light, looking back at them with eyes that promised this wasn't over. David had locked the door behind her with shaking hands, the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place unusually loud in the sudden silence. They'd stood there together, listening to her car pull out of the driveway, the engine fading into the distance like the end of one life and the uncertain beginning of another. "We did the right thing," Alina had said, but her voice carried a question. "We did the only thing," David had replied. "That was 3 days ago. 3 days of waiting for the other shoe to drop, of jumping every time the phone rang, of checking the locks twice before bed." Margaret's absence felt almost as oppressive as her presence had been, loaded with the promise of retaliation. The first sign of trouble came Tuesday morning when Alina arrived at Meridian Marketing, the boutique firm where she worked as a senior graphic designer. Rebecca Chen, no relation to their neighbor, was waiting by her desk with an expression that mixed sympathy with barely concealed curiosity. "Alina, honey," Rebecca said without preamble, "we need to talk." Rebecca had been her supervisor for 3 years, and Alina had never heard that particular tone from her before. It was the voice of someone about to deliver bad news while trying to minimize the fallout. "What's wrong?" Alina set down her coffee, her stomach already sinking with premonition. "I got a call yesterday from someone claiming to be your mother-in-law." Rebecca perched on the edge of Alina's desk, her usually perfect posture slightly hunched. "She was concerned about your mental health." The coffee cup slipped from Alina's fingers, splashing across her desk and soaking into the stack of client presentations she'd been working on late into the night. "She what?" Alina's voice came out sharper than intended, drawing glances from nearby cubicles. "She said you'd been having some kind of breakdown, paranoid delusions about people tampering with your medications. She was very convincing, very concerned." Rebecca grabbed napkins from her desk drawer, helping to mop up the spill. "She mentioned that you'd recently had surgery and might not be thinking clearly." The precision of Margaret's attack took Alina's breath away, every detail carefully chosen to sound plausible, to plant seeds of doubt about Alina's reliability, her mental state, her professional competence. "Rebecca, I need you to listen very carefully," Alina said, lowering her voice. "My mother-in-law there have been some serious boundary issues. What she told you isn't true." But even as she said it, Alina could see the uncertainty in Rebecca's eyes. Margaret had gotten there first, laid the groundwork for exactly this conversation. How do you prove your sanity to someone who's already been told you're losing it? I'm not saying I believed her, Rebecca said carefully, but she was very detailed. She knew about your surgery, about medications you've been taking, about stress in your marriage. Of course, Margaret knew those details. She'd lived in their house for 3 weeks, had access to every intimate detail of their lives. She'd weaponized that information with surgical precision. She also mentioned that you might start making wild accusations about her, Rebecca continued. Said you'd become fixated on conspiracy theories. The trap was perfect. Anything Alina said to defend herself would sound exactly like the paranoid delusions Margaret had already described. Deny the accusations? That's what someone having a breakdown would do. Explain what really happened? That would sound like the conspiracy theories Margaret had preemptively dismissed. I see, Alina said finally. Look, I'm not taking sides here, but maybe you should consider taking some time off. Get your head clear, work things out with your family. Time off. Isolated from her support system, her professional identity, her financial independence. Another piece of Margaret's strategy falling into place. I'll think about it, Alina lied. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of whispered conversations and sidelong glances. Word had spread through the small office with the efficiency of wildfire. Alina caught fragments of hushed discussions. Breakdown, family problems, might not be stable. By lunch, she felt like a ghost haunting her own workplace. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. HR called. Someone reported concerns about your mental health at work. We need to talk. Alina stared at the message, her hands trembling. Margaret wasn't just attacking her. She was systematically dismantling both their professional lives. How had she even known where David worked? But of course she knew. She'd raised him, had probably memorized every detail of his career progression over the years. The drive home felt surreal, as if she was watching someone else navigate the familiar streets. Their house looked the same. The blue shutters David had painted last spring, the flower beds Alina had carefully tended, the mailbox with their names printed in cheerful script. But it felt different now, tainted by the knowledge that Margaret's influence could reach them even here. David was already home, his car in the driveway, his tie loosened and his shirt wrinkled. He met her at the door with an expression she'd never seen before, a mixture of exhaustion and something that might have been doubt. Tell me what happened at work, he said without preamble. Alina recounted her conversation with Rebecca, watching, David's face for signs of disbelief. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. She called my boss too, he said finally. Tom Henderson. Told him I'd been under severe stress at home, that my wife was having some kind of psychological episode that was affecting my work performance. David. She knew things, Alina. Details about the Peterson project, about the client issues we've been having. How could she know those things unless... Unless what? Unless I told her. His voice was flat, defeated. All those late dinners, all those conversations about work stress. I gave her ammunition without even realizing it. The kitchen felt smaller somehow, the walls closing in around them. Alina sank into a chair at the table where just days ago Margaret had served her perfect pancakes and talked about completing their family. What did your boss say? He was diplomatic. Suggested I might want to take some personal time to deal with family issues. Said the company values work-life balance. David's laugh was bitter. Corporate speak for figure out. You're shit before it affects your job. This is insane. She can't destroy our lives because we kicked her out of our house. Can't she? David sat across from her, his hands flat on the table. Think about it, Alina. She knows where we work, who our bosses are, what our vulnerabilities are. She's had years to gather information about our lives. The phone rang, the sound sharp and intrusive in the quiet kitchen. They both stared at it for 3 rings before David finally answered. Martinez residence. His voice was cautious, professional. Alina watched his face change as he listened to whoever was on the other end. His expression shifted from wariness to confusion to something approaching panic. "Yes, she's my wife," he said slowly. "No, she's not." "What kind of reports?" Alina's stomach clenched. Another piece of Margaret's strategy falling into place. "I understand. Yes, we'll look into it. Thank you for letting us know." He hung up, his hand lingering on the receiver. "Who was that?" "Dr. Sarah Martinez." "Not related," he added quickly. "She's a psychiatrist at Riverside Medical. Someone called in a wellness check request, claiming you'd been making threats of self-harm." The room spun slightly. Alina gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "I haven't... David, I would never..." "I know." But his voice carried a trace of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "The doctor said it was an anonymous tip, but very detailed. Mentioned your recent surgery, medication changes, stress at work." Margaret's web was expanding, reaching into every corner of their lives with methodical precision. The beauty of it was diabolical. Each attack designed to make Alina look increasingly unstable while positioning Margaret as the concerned family member trying to help. "We need to call the police," Alina said. "And tell them what? That my mother made some phone calls expressing concern about her daughter-in-law's mental health?" David shook his head. "They'd probably suggest family counseling." "She tampered with my medication, David. She's stalking us, harassing us, trying to sabotage our careers. This isn't just family drama." "I know that. You know that. But prove it. Prove that she switched your pills rather than there being a pharmacy error. Prove that her phone calls come from malice rather than genuine concern." The hopelessness in his voice was devastating. Margaret had chosen her battlefield carefully, operating in the gray areas where concern and control overlapped, where family dynamics provided cover for what was essentially psychological warfare. Alina's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Thinking of you during this difficult time. Family is so important. Love conquers all. M." She showed David the message, watching him read it twice before his face darkened. "How did she get your number?" "She's had my number for 5 years. David. But that's not the point. Look at the message. Love conquers all. She's telling us she's going to keep fighting until she wins." The front doorbell rang, the sound making them both jump. Through the frosted glass, Alina could see 2 figures, official-looking, uniformed. "Police, David," said quietly. They looked at each other across the kitchen table, both understanding that Margaret's next move had just arrived at their front door. The officers were professional, polite, and clearly uncomfortable with what they'd been asked to do. Officer Martinez, another unrelated Martinez, was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Her partner, Officer Thompson, was younger, newer to the job, and kept glancing at his notes as if they might change. "We received a call expressing concern about a resident at this address," Officer Martinez explained, standing in their living room with her hands clasped behind her back. "Someone reported that Mrs. Martinez might be experiencing a mental health crisis." "Who reported it?" Alina asked, though she already knew. The caller preferred to remain anonymous, but they provided very specific information about your recent behavior, medical history, and current state of mind. There it was again, that word, specific. Margaret's signature move, providing just enough detail to sound credible while remaining untraceable. "I'm fine," Alina said simply. "I'm not in crisis. I'm not a danger to myself or anyone else. I'm being targeted by my husband's mother because she disagrees with decisions we've made about our marriage." Officer Thompson looked up from his notepad. "What kind of decisions?" David stepped forward. "Family planning decisions. My mother has been invasive about her desire for grandchildren." "The caller mentioned that you might say something like that," Officer Martinez said gently. that you'd become paranoid about family members, started seeing conspiracies where none exist. The perfect trap, perfectly sprung. Every word of defense they offered had already been discredited by Margaret's preemptive strikes. "Are you currently taking any medications?" Officer Thompson asked. The caller mentioned concerns about prescription drug interactions. Alina stopped, realizing that any answer would feed into Margaret's narrative. Admit to taking medication, and she'd seem unstable. Deny it, and she'd seem delusional about her own medical care. "My wife recently had minor surgery," David said carefully. "She's been on a normal recovery routine, monitored by her doctor. Has she been exhibiting any unusual behavior? Mood swings, paranoia, accusations against family members?" David's hesitation lasted only a second, but Alina caught it. The seed of doubt Margaret had planted was taking root. "No," he said finally. But his voice lacked conviction. Officer Martinez studied them both with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every variation of domestic drama. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm going to ask you directly. Are you having thoughts of harming yourself or others?" "No." "Are you currently in fear for your safety?" Alina considered the question. Was she afraid of Margaret? Not physically. The woman was 54 and barely 5 feet tall. But afraid of what she might do next, how much damage she could cause. "I'm concerned about harassment from my mother-in-law," Alina said carefully. "She's been calling our employers, making false reports about my mental state. Have you filed a formal complaint? We just discovered what she was doing today." Officer Martinez nodded, making notes. "I'm going to recommend that you document any further contact from your mother-in-law. Keep records of phone calls, text messages, any attempts to contact your employers or medical providers." "Is that all?" David asked. "For now. But Mrs. Martinez, if you are struggling with mental health issues, there's no shame in seeking help." The caller seemed genuinely concerned about your well-being. After the officers left, Alina and David sat in their living room, the weight of Margaret's strategy fully apparent now. She wasn't just trying to control their lives, she was systematically destroying their credibility, their relationships, their sense of safety in their own community. "She's going to keep escalating," Alina said. "What else can she do?" As if summoned by the question, Alina's phone buzzed with another text from the unknown number. "Saw the police at your house. So sorry you're going through this difficult time. Here if you need anything. Family sticks together." She was watching them. Somehow Margaret was monitoring their house, their movements, their responses to her attacks. The text had arrived within minutes of the officers leaving, suggesting surveillance that went beyond simple harassment. "David," Alina said slowly, "I think we're in real danger here." "From my mother? From someone who's willing to destroy our lives to get what she wants. Someone who sees us as obstacles rather than people." Through the front window, the street looked normal. Neighbors walking dogs, kids playing in yards, the ordinary rhythm of suburban life. But somewhere in that normalcy, Margaret was watching, planning, preparing her next move in a game where only she knew all the rules. The escalation continued over the following days, like a carefully orchestrated symphony of psychological warfare. Thursday brought a call to their mortgage company, someone expressing concern about the homeowner's ability to make future payments due to serious mental health and employment issues. Friday morning, their neighbor Mrs. Chen knocked on their door with uncomfortable questions about reports that there had been domestic disturbances at their address. "I told whoever called that you two are the quietest neighbors we've ever had," Mrs. Chen said, her weathered hands wrapping around the cup of tea Alina had offered. But they were very insistent. Said there had been screaming, throwing things, threats. Alina and David exchanged glances across their kitchen table. Margaret wasn't just attacking them directly anymore. She was poisoning their relationships with everyone around them, creating a network of suspicion and concern that would be nearly impossible to untangle. "Who called you?" David asked. "Said she was from some kind of family services organization. Had an official-sounding name." Mrs. Chen frowned, trying to remember. "Family Intervention Alliance, something like that. Very professional, very concerned about your well-being." Family Intervention Alliance. Alina pulled out her phone and did a quick search while Mrs. Chen continued talking. No results. It was a fake organization, created just convincing enough to sound legitimate to a concerned neighbor. "Mrs. Chen," Alina said gently, "there is no Family Intervention Alliance. Someone is making false reports about us." The older woman's eyes widened. "But why would someone do that?" "Because they want to control our lives," David said simply. After Mrs. Chen left, shaking her head in confusion and promising to call them if she received any more suspicious inquiries, Alina felt the walls of their ordinary life collapsing around them. Margaret wasn't just harassing them. She was systematically destroying their reputation, their professional standing, their relationships with everyone who mattered. "We need help," Alina said. "Real help. From someone who understands what we're dealing with." David was already pulling up contacts on his phone. "My college roommate Jake is a lawyer now. Family law, mostly divorces, but he might know someone." "Fao? Call to Jake Chen, no relation to their neighbor or Alina's supervisor. Just another of the universe's small coincidences. Opened doors they hadn't known existed." Jake listened to their story with the practiced attention of someone who'd heard similar tales of family dysfunction turned toxic. "What you're describing is called intimate partner abuse by proxy," Jake said, his voice crackling slightly through the speakerphone, "when someone uses family relationships to control and manipulate their victims indirectly." "But she's not my intimate partner," Alina said. "She's my mother-in-law." "The intimate partner in this case is David. She's using her relationship with him to abuse you. It's more common than you'd think, especially with controlling mothers who can't accept their adult children's independence." Jake gave them the contact information for Detective Linda Rodriguez, a specialist in harassment and stalking cases who worked with the county district attorney's office. "Tell her I referred you. And Alina, start documenting everything immediately. Every phone call, every text, every instance of workplace interference. You're going to need a paper trail." Detective Rodriguez agreed to meet them Saturday morning at the police station, a nondescript building that smelled of industrial coffee and institutional disinfectant. Rodriguez herself was in her mid-40s, with steel-gray hair pulled back, in a practical ponytail and eyes that had seen too much human cruelty to be surprised by much of anything anymore. "Jake Chen briefed me on your situation," she said without preamble, settling into a chair across from them in a small interview room. "Tell me everything from the beginning." They talked for 2 hours, Alina's voice growing stronger as she recounted the pill switching, the phone calls to employers, the fake wellness checks, the invented organizations contacting neighbors. Rodriguez took notes with mechanical precision, occasionally asking for clarification or additional details. "The medication tampering is the strongest case," Rodriguez said finally. "That's clear-cut criminal behavior, reckless endangerment at minimum, possibly assault depending on how the DA's office wants to prosecute it." "What about the rest?" David asked. "Harassment, possibly stalking. The fake organization calls could be fraud. The employment interference might qualify as intentional interference with business relationships." Rodriguez leaned back in her chair. "Your mother-in-law has been busy." "So you believe us?" Alina asked. "I've seen this pattern before. Family members who use their insider knowledge to systematically destroy their targets' lives. It's particularly insidious because they operate from a position of presumed love and concern." Rodriguez explained the next steps. Formal complaints would be filed, Margaret would be contacted and warned to cease all contact, and if the behavior continued, criminal charges would be pursued. "But I need to warn you," Rodriguez added. "People like this don't usually stop when asked politely." If anything, official intervention sometimes escalates the behavior. As if to prove the detective's point, Alina's phone buzzed with a text message while they sat in the interview room. Unknown number. Heard you've been talking to police about family matters. Some things are better kept private. Love always finds a way. Rodriguez read the message and smiled grimly. She just gave us real-time evidence of monitoring and implied threats. This woman is going to be her own worst enemy. How is she watching us? David asked. How did she know we were here? Could be anything. Following you, monitoring your social media, tracking your phones. People like this become very resourceful when they're obsessed. The drive home felt different, charged with the possibility that they were being watched. Every car behind them might be Margaret, every person on the sidewalk a potential spy in her network of manipulation. Back at the house, they began the systematic documentation Rodriguez had recommended. Alina printed emails, saved text messages, wrote down every detail she could remember about the past week's harassment. The evidence was overwhelming when laid out chronologically, a clear pattern of escalating interference designed to isolate and control them. Sunday morning brought a new development. David answered the door to find a woman in her 30s holding a clipboard and wearing the practiced smile of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. Mr. Martinez? I'm Sandra. Williams from Child Protective Services. We received a report that there might be concerns about child welfare at this residence. The blood drained from David's face. We don't have children. The report indicated that Mrs. Martinez is currently pregnant and may not be receiving appropriate prenatal care due to mental health issues. Alina appeared behind David, her face pale but determined. Ms. Williams, we filed a police report yesterday about harassment from my mother-in-law. This is part of that pattern. Sandra Williams looked confused, consulting her notes. The report came from someone identifying herself as your mother-in-law, expressing concern about your ability to care for an unborn child. And you didn't think it was strange that she was reporting her own daughter-in-law? David asked. Family dynamics can be complicated, Mr. Martinez. Sometimes grandparents are the first to notice when there might be problems. They spent 20 minutes explaining the situation to Williams, who took notes with professional skepticism. The pregnancy was confirmed. Alina was indeed expecting, but there were no signs of neglect or inappropriate care. Williams eventually left, but not before warning them that the case would remain open pending further investigation. She's using our pregnancy against us, Alina said after Williams left, turning it into a weapon. How did she even know you? Were pregnant? David asked. We haven't told anyone. Alina thought back through the past week, trying to remember every interaction, every conversation. Then it hit her. The morning Margaret had made those pointed comments about first trimester symptoms, about herbal tea that was good for women's health. She knew before we kicked her out, Alina said slowly. She knew I was pregnant because she was monitoring my symptoms, probably watching for signs that her pill switching had worked. The realization was sickening. Margaret hadn't just tampered with Alina's medication. She'd been conducting surveillance of her body, tracking her. Reproductive cycle like a scientist monitoring a lab experiment. David sank into a chair, his head in his hands. This is insane. She's my mother. How did I not see that she was capable of this? Because she raised you to not see it, Alina said gently. This is what she does, David. She controls through love, through concern, through making you feel guilty, for questioning her motives. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. CPS visit went well, I hope. Just want to make sure everyone is taking proper care of precious cargo. Family first. M. She showed David the message, watching his face cycle through disbelief, anger, and finally, a cold determination she'd never seen before. No more, he said quietly. What do you mean? I mean, no more treating her like a misguided family member. No more trying to handle this privately. No more giving her the benefit of the doubt because she's my mother." David stood up, his jaw set. "She's destroyed our careers, invaded our privacy, endangered your health, and now she's using our unborn child as a weapon against us. She's not family anymore. She's a predator." The shift in his language, in his entire demeanor, felt like a turning point. For weeks, David had been caught between loyalty to his mother and protection of his wife. But Margaret's escalation had finally pushed him past the point where blood relationship provided any cover for her behavior. "So what do? We fight back," David said simply. "We stop being victims and start being adversaries." Outside, the afternoon sun painted their neighborhood in golden light, the same suburban peace they'd enjoyed for 5 years of marriage. But inside their house, something fundamental had changed. They were no longer the people they'd been a week ago, innocent, trusting, secure in their small circle of family and friends. Margaret had forced them to become something harder, more suspicious, more prepared for battle, and perhaps that had been her greatest mistake, because now they understood the game she was playing, and they were ready to play it better than she was. The break in Margaret's carefully constructed facade came from an unexpected source: her own desperation. By Monday morning, the web of lies and manipulation she'd woven had become so complex that maintaining it required constant attention, and constant attention led to inevitable mistakes. The first crack appeared when Detective Rodriguez called them at 9 a.m. with news that would change everything. "Your mother-in-law made a critical error," Rodriguez said, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a hunter who'd finally cornered her prey. "She called your pharmacy directly, claiming to be you, trying to get information about prescription refills." Alina gripped the phone tighter. "She what?" "Pharmacy fraud is a federal crime, Mrs. Martinez. And fortunately for us, West Side Pharmacy has excellent security protocols." The call was recorded, and the pharmacist became suspicious when you couldn't provide basic information like your date of birth and address. David leaned closer to hear the conversation. "What exactly did she say?" "She was trying to confirm whether you'd been taking prenatal vitamins instead of birth control pills. Apparently, she wanted to verify her timeline for when you would have become pregnant." Rodriguez paused. The pharmacist, to his credit, immediately called our office to report suspicious activity. The irony was perfect. Margaret's need to control every detail of her manipulation had led her to create evidence of her crimes in real time. "There's more," Rodriguez continued. "We traced the phone number she used to make the pharmacy call, and it's registered to a burner phone purchased with cash 3 weeks ago in Riverside. Someone was planning this campaign of harassment well in advance. 3 weeks ago, right around the time Margaret had arrived at their house, ostensibly to help Alina recover from surgery. The premeditation was staggering. "What happens now?" Alina asked. "Now we build the case. I need you to come in this afternoon and provide a formal statement. And I need the physical evidence, the pills you saved, the original bottle, anything else you've documented." When they arrived at the police station that afternoon, Rodriguez led them to a different room, larger, with recording equipment and a stenographer. The gravity of the situation was becoming real in ways that made Alina's hands shake as she swore to tell the truth. "Let's start with the medication tampering," Rodriguez said, activating the recording device. "Tell me exactly when you first discovered that your birth control pills had been switched." As Alina recounted the story, the stenographer's fingers flew across the keys, creating an official record of Margaret's violation. But it was when they reached the harassment campaign that Rodriguez's expression grew particularly grim. "Mrs. Martinez, I need you to understand something about what's happened to you," Rodriguez said. "This wasn't random family drama that got out of hand. This was a coordinated campaign of psychological abuse designed to isolate you, destroy your credibility, and ultimately force you into the role your mother-in-law wanted you to play." What do you mean? Think about the pattern. First, she violated your reproductive autonomy to create a pregnancy. Then, when you discovered her actions and expelled her from your home, she immediately began attacking your professional credibility, your mental health reputation, and your relationships with neighbors and community services. David frowned. But why? What was the end game? Rodriguez had clearly seen this pattern before. The end game was to make you so isolated, so dependent, so discredited that you'd have no choice but to accept her back into your lives. Who else would help you when everyone else believed you were unstable? The revelation hit like cold water. Margaret hadn't been lashing out in hurt anger. She'd been executing a calculated plan to regain control over their lives. The pregnancy was just the opening move in a longer game. She wanted you desperate, Rodriguez continued. Unemployed, socially isolated, with a baby on the way and everyone believing you were mentally unstable. In that position, her generous offer to help care for her grandchild would seem like salvation rather than continued manipulation. Alina struggled for words. That's monstrous. It's textbook intimate partner abuse, executed through a family proxy. Your mother-in-law has been treating you like an adversary in a war you didn't know you were fighting. The formal interview lasted 3 hours, covering every detail of Margaret's campaign. By the end, they had constructed a timeline that revealed the sophisticated nature of her psychological warfare, the careful gathering of information, the strategic timing of attacks, the escalating pattern designed to maximize damage while maintaining plausible deniability. "What's our next step?" David asked as Rodriguez walked them to the lobby. "I'm presenting the case to the district attorney's office tomorrow. The pharmacy fraud alone is enough for federal charges, but I think we can build a stronger case around the harassment and stalking charges." "How long will that take?" "These things move slowly, but the evidence is solid. I'd expect charges to be filed within the week." As they drove home, Alina felt a strange mixture of relief and anxiety. Having official recognition that Margaret's behavior was criminal rather than just inappropriate was validating. But it also meant they were crossing a line from family drama into legal warfare, and Margaret wasn't likely to accept that transition gracefully. Her phone rang as they pulled into their driveway. Unknown number, but by now they recognized the pattern. Alina answered on speaker, her voice steady. "Hello, Margaret." A pause. "Hello, dear. I was hoping we could talk. Through our lawyers," David said firmly. "Lawyers?" "Really, David? Don't you think that's a bit dramatic? Family shouldn't need lawyers to communicate." "Family doesn't commit pharmacy fraud," Alina said. Another pause. Longer this time. When Margaret spoke again, her voice carried a different quality, sharper, less concerned with maintaining her facade of maternal concern. "I think you're both making a very serious mistake. Involving outsiders in private family matters never ends well." "Is that a threat?" David asked. "It's advice, sweetheart. From someone who loves you and wants what's best for your future." "What's best for our future is for you to leave us alone," Alina said. Margaret's laugh was cold, nothing like the warm maternal chuckle she'd perfected over the years. "Oh, honey, you have no idea what's best for your future, but you will. Very soon." The line went dead, leaving them sitting in their car in their own driveway, staring at the phone like it might contain an explosive device. "She's not going to stop," Alina said. "No," David agreed, "but at least now we know what we're dealing with." That evening, they received an unexpected visitor. Emily arrived at their door with a bottle of wine and an expression that mixed concern with excitement. "I have news," she said without preamble, settling into their living room with the comfortable familiarity of their 15-year friendship. "About your mother-in-law situation." "What kind of news?" Alina asked. "The kind that comes from having friends in medical records departments." Emily's grin was slightly wicked. "I did some digging into Margaret's medical history. Specifically, her psychiatric history. David leaned forward. And 3 hospitalizations between 2018 and 2020, all related to what the records describe as obsessive episodes regarding family relationships. Emily pulled out her phone, consulting notes she'd typed. Apparently, she became fixated on her sister's daughter, tried to interfere in that woman's marriage and reproduction decisions. The sister had to get a restraining order. The revelation recontextualized everything. Margaret's behavior toward them wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of obsessive control over family members' reproductive lives. There's more, Emily continued. I talked to a friend who works at Riverside Medical, where that psychiatrist called about your supposed wellness check. Margaret was a patient there until 2021, diagnosed with something called reproductive coercion disorder, along with obsessive-compulsive tendencies focused on family genetics. Reproductive coercion disorder? Alina had never heard the term. It's a specific type of obsessive-compulsive disorder where the individual becomes fixated on controlling other people's reproductive choices. Usually manifests in intimate relationships, but it can extend to family members. David was quiet for a long moment, processing this new understanding of his mother's psychology. So this isn't just her being pushy about grandchildren, this is actually a mental illness. A mental illness she's weaponized, Emily corrected. Having a psychiatric diagnosis doesn't excuse criminal behavior. If anything, it explains why she's been so systematic and escalatory in her approach. Alina's phone buzzed with a text from the unknown number. Heard you've been researching family medical history. Privacy is important, don't you think? Some secrets are better left buried. They all stared at the message. Somehow, Margaret knew about Emily's investigation into her medical records. How is she monitoring us so closely? David asked. Emily looked uncomfortable. I might have an answer to that, too. When I was researching her background, I found something else. She's been employed as a private investigator since 2019. The silence that followed was deafening. Margaret wasn't just an obsessive mother-in-law with boundary issues. She was a trained professional in surveillance and investigation, with both the skills and the legal knowledge to conduct sophisticated harassment campaigns while staying just within the bounds of plausible deniability. Jesus Christ, David whispered. She turned our lives into a case she was working. More than that, Emily said grimly. She turned your marriage into a target she was hunting. The phone rang. They all looked at it, knowing without checking that it would be Margaret, calling to demonstrate once again that she was always watching, always listening, always one step ahead of their attempts to understand and counter her manipulation. David answered, his voice cold. What do you want? I want to talk to you, son, in person, just the two of us, like we used to, before outside influences started poisoning your mind against your own mother. Those outside influences include the police, Margaret, and the district attorney's office. A long pause. When she spoke again, her voice carried a quality they'd never heard before. Genuine surprise, as if the possibility of legal consequences had never seriously occurred to her. You contacted law enforcement? About your own mother? About a criminal, David said firmly. Who happens to share my DNA? David, sweetheart, I think you need to understand something very important about your situation. You and Alina have made some choices recently that could have very serious consequences for your future together, for your child's future. The threat was implicit but unmistakable. Margaret was preparing to escalate beyond harassment into territory that could genuinely endanger them. What kind of consequences? Alina asked, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her veins. The kind that come from making accusations against family members who have resources and connections you can't imagine, Margaret replied, her mask finally falling completely away. I've spent 30 years building relationships in this community. Dear judges, social workers, medical professionals, people who trust my judgment. Emily grabbed Alina's hand, squeezing tight. David's face had gone pale, but his jaw was set with newfound resolve. Are you threatening to take our child? David asked. I'm promising to protect my grandchild from parents who clearly aren't capable of making rational decisions. A mother with documented mental health issues and a father too weak to control his unstable wife? CPS takes those cases very seriously. The threat crystallized everything. This had never been about love or family. It had been about ownership. Margaret saw their unborn child not as David and Alina's baby, but as her genetic legacy to be acquired by any means necessary. You're insane, Alina whispered. I'm prepared, Margaret corrected. The question is, are you prepared for a custody battle with someone who has 30 years of professional relationships and documentation of your recent psychological instability? David stood up suddenly, his movement sharp with anger. You know what, Mom? Bring it on. David, no, Alina. She's right about one thing. She's prepared. But she made one crucial mistake. His voice carried a cold fury that matched Margaret's own. She taught me to be thorough, to document everything, to never enter a battle without knowing your opponent's weaknesses. He pulled out his phone, accessing the recording app. Every conversation we've had in the past week has been recorded. Every threat, every admission, every moment where you dropped your caring mother act and revealed what you really are. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that they wondered if she'd hung up. When Margaret finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller, younger somehow, as if the revelation had stripped years of carefully constructed authority from her. You recorded me? I recorded a criminal making threats against my family, David said simply. Detective Rodriguez is going to be very interested in your promises about judges and social workers. Conspiracy charges carry serious prison time. I love you, Margaret whispered, and for the first time in weeks, she sounded like the mother. David remembered. I raised you. I sacrificed everything for you. How can you do this to me? Because you taught me to protect the people I love, David replied, and you're not one of those people anymore. The call ended with the finality of a door closing forever. 3 months later, Margaret Martinez was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison for pharmacy fraud, stalking, and conspiracy charges. The restraining order would remain in place. For 5 years after her release, Alina's pregnancy progressed normally. Their daughter was born healthy and perfect, surrounded by friends who had rallied around them once the truth came out. David's relationship with his mother was permanently severed, but the family he'd chosen to protect flourished. Sometimes, late at night when the baby cried, Alina would remember those terrifying weeks when their lives had been turned upside down by someone who claimed to love them. But then David would appear beside her, ready to share the burden, and she'd remember the most important truth Margaret had inadvertently taught them. Real family protects each other's choices. Everything else is just manipulation wearing the mask of love. Subscribe now and never miss a story.